Hello and welcome to hashtag No Limits. I am your host, Shelly Kino, and this is hashtag No Limits. As I said, sorry, I just got a notification that Facebook is doing something weird, so it kind of threw me off for a second. But I do want to let you know that I believe very much that we know who we are and not who we'll be. And Ophelia says that in Hamlet. And I 100% agree with that, and that there is no better or more beautiful example than the caterpillar turning into the butterfly. Quick science lesson: the caterpillar literally dissolves into cells, reforms into the butterfly, but it's not finished struggling. It has to struggle in order for its wings to be strong enough to fly and take it to all the beautiful places and to soar through our skies. That can't be easy, but neither is busting through limits that society places upon us. And today, my guest is going to talk to us about being a sibling to someone who has had limits placed upon them. And I've had a few siblings on in the past, but Nora's story is obviously unique, just like everyone's story is. And she's going to share some great and wonderful things that are going on in the world of the S.I.B.S network. And she'll tell you what that stands for. It doesn't stand for exactly what you think it stands for, I bet. But first, I just want to remind you, like or subscribe to this channel. You don't want to miss an episode, and you especially don't want to miss 2 weeks from today. This is episode 198. We will be having 200 on April the 1st, 2025. And on that episode, I'm having Merle Evans. She's going to be amazing. She will be my first deaf guest that I've had. And so I'm very much looking forward to that. And also, I'm going to be giving prizes away throughout the episode. I have St. Louis Cardinals baseball tickets. I have Holiday World Splash and Safari in Santa Claus, Indiana tickets. I have a pair of earrings. I have my book, and there might even be a few other surprises. So make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss an episode. And if you're watching today, give us a hashtag like and where you're watching. I'm hashtag live and where you're watching from. And if you watch it in the replay, a hashtag replay and where you're watching from. All right. You have had enough about me. So let me bring on Nora. And how are you doing today, Nora?
I'm doing well.
Good. Enjoying some. You look like I'm in like a quarter zip sweatshirt kind of thing, and you don't look like you have sleeves. So we are definitely in different temperature areas.
I'm just finishing up almost 3 months in Florida.
Oh, wow. Very nice. Very nice. Yeah.
It's one of the joys of being retired.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said in the introduction, you're part of the S.I.B.S network, and that people probably are not going to have the right what all of those letters stand for. But I want you to go ahead, and before we get to that, you have a whole history of life that happened before that. So introduce yourself and just start telling us some of your story.
Okay. Well, I'm the third sibling out of 8. And
wow.
Yep, that very big Irish Catholic family. My mother's favorite story, or my favorite story about my mom, is how she would tell her daughters about being safe when we started having boyfriends. And she would say,
that's a good thing to do.
It was funny. She would say, I just want you to know that there is no 100% safe thing that you can do to not get pregnant. And as an illustration, she would tell us which form of failed birth control we were conceived under.
Oh my gosh.
And some of my siblings don't love the fact that I always bring up, but she did plan one of us, and that's me. So after having my older sister Margaret and my brother Marty, they decided as a couple that they'd like to have 3 kids, and that would be enough. And so they had me, and then they had 5 more. And the first 2 was the approved form of birth control by the Catholic Church. and that was rhythm. And it it doesn't really work well. And so they had their first two kids that way. Then they had me. Then she abandoned the idea of that kind of birth control, and she had one kid under every kind of birth control you can think of, including my brother Michael, who was number 8, who was conceived on the birth control pill. So my mother was obviously very fertile.
Sure.
Yeah. So that's one of the favorite stories, and that's kind of why they had 8. And they even almost had 9, but the last one didn't work out. So yep, a lot of kids, and we were all about 2 years apart.
Okay.
Yep. So my brother Marty, who I still have in my life, he was born with the cord wrapped around his neck, and so he had some oxygen deprivation. And so when they started to see some, perhaps I could call them differences, they kind of put it off to that. And then they had a bunch of girls. And baby number 7 was my brother Patrick. And by the time that they realized something was going on with Patrick, Michael had been conceived. And so they were born in the 60s. And their diagnosis at that time was mild mental retardation. And retardation, especially as a medical term, was, not, it was a term that was used all the time. It
Sure.
wasn't considered a negative like it is now.
Right.
And so, that's the way I grew up, having 3 brothers with special needs, even though Marty wasn't diagnosed until his 40s. But, everybody knew he had something. So he went to regular school, and then they put him in a vocational tract, and he did finish high school, and he actually went to junior college. And I went to the same junior college, and I got to give him rides to school, which I was not pleased about. And especially back then, I did not have the best relationship with my brother. He was odd, and he was embarrassing. And, I had to go to school with him all my life. And so I even got to go to college with him. But, that was much more separate than school was, as high school. And Marty was just sort of mortifying. And so I just kept my distance with him as much as possible. I wouldn't admit that he was my brother unless I had to. I mean, looking back at it, it really seems mean, but
Yeah.
But he was embarrassing. And so that's pretty hard for a teenager.
Yeah.
And so my younger brothers were the babies. And so we were all much more tolerant of them. And we also understood that they had a disability. And so they were given a lot more leeway. And Marty wasn't so much, it was sad for him. It was tough for him. And it really took a long time for me to get to know him and like him. And how that really happened was when my mom passed away in 1998, and 7 of us were still at home. When my dad died, And so my mom, 25 years of on her own with these kids, and my brothers
Yeah.
lived with her all her whole their whole life
Right.
until she passed away. And so when she passed away, we had to figure out as sisters what we were going to do about all these brothers who needed a place to live. And my mom had hoped that one of us, and who she really wanted was my sister Margaret, the first one, to come and live in her place and
Sure.
carry on. And we had tried to talk to her about this wasn't a good plan and that she needed to have a plan. And she said, well, she had a plan, but she would never tell us what it was.
Oh,
And
that's
we
not
had
very
all,
helpful then.
it was not very helpful. And given that my dad, when he died, he did not have a will.
Oh,
And so, here he had all these kids and 3 with special needs. And I don't think most men think they're going to die at 46, but he did.
right.
And so we all learned that that's really a bad thing not to have a will.
Yeah.
And it can be, harder or easier depending on where you live. And in Illinois, it was not easy, and it took 5 years for the estate to be settled. So we at least all knew that mom would have a will,
Right.
and she said she had a trust. And we were not, none of us were really connected to the disability world. We didn't really know that it's more complicated for that kind of a family. And we just took her at her word because she wasn't going to share anyway.
Right.
She just told us the information is under the blotter on my desk. You'll find everything you need. Well, when that all happened, we did not find everything we needed. And in fact, we could not even find her will for a while. And then when we did find out, she had a trust, but it wasn't a special needs trust. And
Oh,
what the trust did was it disqualified my brothers for the benefits that people with disabilities need.
oh
Um,
no.
it was a bit of a disaster, to put it lightly. We eventually got the younger two. Well, they had Medicare because they were disabled, but they didn't have Medicaid, and the trust had a fair amount of money. And by the time we sold my mom's farm, which was in a wealthy area, even though the farm itself was kind of a mess, but it was still, a good piece of property. So adding that to what she had was a fair amount of money. So it took care of them for a long time. Now, Marty was the exception, and he was not written into the trust. The trust was set up for the heirs, but it was really thought to be for the younger two. And my mom always thought Marty could be okay. Well, it just wasn't the case. And even though he got his 2-year degree, he was such an odd guy that he could never get a job. He worked on my mom's farm, which was a hobby farm when my dad was alive, and then she turned it into a boarding stable. And that's kind of how she survived with income. And so that is the only job that Marty had, and we weren't going to be able to keep that farm.
Oh,
So,
right.
right. So, we went there. We took turns, the sisters, all staying with them for, gosh, I can't remember, like 6 months maybe. And I was living 3 hours away, so I went on the weekends. And so I did every weekend for many, many months. And then when we finally made a plan, my older sister, we still didn't know anything about disability stuff, really. My older sister decided that she would take them all in, but they needed to add on to their house to do it. And so my youngest sister, Kathleen, took my brother Patrick into her home. I took Marty, and my sister Margaret, while she was having her house expanded, she had our brother Michael. And during the time that my husband and I and our son had Marty living with us, we got him diagnosed. And his diagnosis was high functioning autism. I kind of thought he was going to be Asperger's. And I like to practice without a license. So I come from a medical family, so I do know a lot. And I have a husband who's a doctor. My dad was a doctor, so I worked as a lab tech for a while. So I mean, I knew a fair amount, but I did like to push it a little bit. So I had already come up with the diagnosis of Asperger's after doing some research. And then when we took him to just a regular doctor and then a neuropsychologist, and they didn't agree with my diagnosis. It was close, but and then back then, we had more distinctions of autism than we technically do now. And right. Asperger's was a really higher IQ. Marty just had a normal IQ, kind of close to, it was normal, but close to borderline. And so that's why they diagnosed him with high functioning autism. And getting a diagnosis, he was able then to get some services. And so while he was with us, he went to a workshop, and he met his first peers in his whole life, and he was like 45 years old. He had his first friends because he didn't have any friends until that time. So it was pretty exciting for him. And when he got the diagnosis, it didn't bother him at all. In fact, he seemed to be happy about it. And he's not the kind of autistic person that is nonverbal. There are times, trust me, when I'd be like, I kind of wish you were nonverbal. Because he talks a lot to anyone, anywhere, anytime, and sometimes maybe a little inappropriately. But he had a fabulous time at the workshop. He made his first friends. He had his first girlfriend, which was a little scary. We had to make sure that Marty had the talk.
Right.
Yep.
Yes.
And doesn't matter that he was in his 40s. He'd never had the talk.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Yep. So we made my brother-in-law do it. We decided it should be a man.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. And my plan for the time that I had him was I was going to make sure he didn't get into any trouble. And so all of his visits with his first girlfriend were pretty much chaperoned. It's like the only thing that he did without a chaperone was he'd go to the movie. He didn't drive, so he needed me to take him to the places.
Right.
And then he had the girlfriend over once, and he lived in our basement. I was in that basement about every 15 minutes. I'm sure he deeply appreciated.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. So then eventually he moved up to my sisters after they were finished with their addition. And all three of the brothers lived with my sister and her husband and her daughter, who was also a teenager and not thrilled.
Um,
And that didn't last long. We had the youngest brother had also schizoaffective disorder. So he was the
Oh.
most complicated one. And there was a period of time when he was not in control well on his medication. And it was very difficult for my sister to take care of him. And so eventually he was put in a group home, and it was like on an emergency basis. So in Illinois, there's a long waiting list for services and especially housing. But if you have an emergency, you can go to the top of the list, which is what happened. But in that case, you don't really get a choice. You have to kind of take what they give you.
Right.
And we didn't like the group home very much. So that was really traumatic. And I think it was more traumatic for me and my sister, my older sister, than it was even for my brother. And after that happened, my other brother was not happy. My younger brother, Patrick, was not happy being there without Michael. And Marty didn't get along well with the younger two brothers. And so Marty got into a Section 8 apartment. And we have remained in all those years as his advocate. And my husband has healthcare power of attorney, but Marty is his own guardian.
Good.
Yeah, he needs financial assistance and just guidance and so which sometimes he didn't want.
Right.
But
Sure.
he would have just lived in a pit if we hadn't been involved.
Right.
Yeah, so we did that as his sisters for 27 years after Mom died. He recently moved into assisted living, which took a long time to get a decent place and a place that would take a person with autism. But we got a decent place, and he just literally moved in there about 2 weeks ago. So that's kind of a great thing for everybody. He's fine with it. He handled that loss of independence better than most of us would, I think. So he's fine with where he is, and it's a relief for my sister and me because he was a lot to add on to our own plates. And he needed more and more help as he got older. So I was living in Chicago for many years, but we moved out to the suburbs 3 years ago, and I ended up moving into an area that was half a mile away from him. So
nice.
Yeah, well, pros and cons, when
Sure.
we talk about where we moved, and I say, and it was just, I was less than a mile away from my brother, and people would say, great, and I'd say, yes, my husband. And I think it's been hard for our husbands over all that time because they've required a lot of our time and attention. And, it's easy to resent when you don't feel like you're the number one,
Right.
It's tough. It's a challenge. And even now it's still a bit of a challenge because Marty will always be someone that we have to look out for.
Yeah.
So different, and I think that's one of the things that I talk about a lot is the responsibilities of siblings, especially after their parents pass away. Um,
Right.
and there's a lot to it. Um, and and we had three brothers with special needs.
Yeah.
So it was challenging. It was super challenging. And some of the challenges come from the system or
Right.
the lack of services or the lack of good services. Um, you know, what do you do when they get older? What happens when they leave school? Um,
Right.
I'm sure you've heard the term of falling off a cliff,
Yes.
and the cliff is pretty hard. Um, and that was really hard for my mom. And we all felt that we could never really move far away. Um,
Yeah.
and I moved the furthest, and I was 6 hours away for 10 years. Um, and my mom was younger then, and she could handle it better. Um, and I visited a lot. Um, and then when job things changed for my husband, he always knew, and it felt like a little bit of an unfair thing that I would say we have to stay close. And it limited his choices. Um, and he was willing to do it, and my brother-in-law was willing to take them in. And we were very lucky that they were willing to do what they did. Um,
Right. And I so appreciate you sharing so honestly all that you have shared so far, because I don't think most people realize that it is a lifelong journey when you have a child or when you have a sibling who has some big, unique needs. And as you said, the falling off the cliff when the kids get out of school, and I don't know if your brothers even were still in school when the special education law went into place, but um, even today, there really aren't great services for when they stay until their 21st or 22nd birthday, whatever, or in some states it's older than that. In some states it's a little younger than that. But um, it does, like, the birth to three, there's such great support, and it's like a loving environment. And there's, I'm not going to say it's rainbows and unicorns, but it's pretty loving and happy. And then the families get their kids into school, and it becomes supportive, but a bit more of a battle in a lot of instances.
right,
And then when they finish school, it's almost like everything disappears.
exactly. And I mean, back then, they 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 didn't have inclusion. So my brothers
Mhm.
never experienced. Marty experienced inclusion because he fell through the cracks and didn't fit anywhere. And so
Right.
he was included, but it was not in a happy way for him. I mean, I can't imagine, going through my whole public school years and not having a friend,
Right.
and
Yeah.
he was the object of teasing and bullying, and um so I think it was scarring for him. And
Yeah.
I think it's one of the reasons that he was happy when he had a diagnosis,
Mhm.
and he never felt any sort of shame. um you know it didn't bother him. It doesn't bother him. um I think the only thing that bothers him about his disability is that it put some limits on him, that he didn't
Sure.
want. He didn't
Right.
want, you know. Um, but it doesn't impact him now. He's 71 years old.
Mhm.
And it doesn't have any sort of impact that I think that he feels. When my mom passed away, my brothers, the younger two, they knew that they had something special, but they didn't. No one ever used the term around them, retardation.
Mm.
And at my mother's wake, somebody must have been talking about them, and my youngest brother heard. And he said to us, "Why did my mother never tell me I was retarded?"
Wow.
Right? What a statement, you know? And I truly cannot remember how we explained things to I mean, that was such a traumatic time that I don't,
Right.
And one of the things that can happen to siblings is at that time, which is so difficult for all of us, losing a parent, and especially losing the last parent, you know,
Right.
um, you should be able to have the time that you need to grieve. We did not. We had
Yeah.
we had a responsibility, and we had
Right.
a sudden huge responsibility that we were not prepared for. And
Yeah.
I always felt like we we just didn't have the normal time, if there is a normal time, to
Right. And
to
I
grieve.
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing that up as well, because I know there's a lot of discussion in the disabilities community about group homes or keeping the person at home. And in my book, Those Who Can't Teach: True Stories of Special Needs Families, to promote acceptance, inclusion, and empathy, one of the people in the book um, talked about the fact that she was a visiting nurse and she would be helping elderly patients, and they really needed to be in a nursing home or in a hospital, but they wouldn't go because they had a child with a disability, a grown-up child, living with them, and they couldn't leave them. And when her son got to the age when he was going to finish high school, she didn't want him to have to process moving while he was grieving. And for her, she chose to research the group homes and SILAs, and they found one, and she talked with her son, and he was okay with it. And she thought it would be a few years down the road before they would find one for him, and it was just a few months. And
No.
so he basically went from high school graduation and he graduated at 18, to living in a group home by age 18 and a half or so, and he's lived in a group home ever since then. And she said it was probably the best decision for him because of the support that he receives. He has people who he can do things with, who he can socialize with, who he can be friends with. She says he has a social life better than hers because they're taking them out, and going to different things and doing events and, having bingo and whatever. And she said, and we wouldn't be able to do that while, she and her husband are working full time. So it is a very, very difficult decision, and one that I don't I don't know how you decide which way is best. And I'm not sure that there is one way that's best for everybody.
Yeah, I just think but what you said, it was something we couldn't impress upon my mom, and the best I can say about that is that it was a family tradition that you take care of your own. You don't put your
Mhm.
mother in a nursing home either.
Right.
If there's any way that you can avoid it, you take your mom in,
Right.
or
Yep.
um and so that was the tradition. I guess that was the thinking, that we take care of our own. And we couldn't budge her on that. Um, And it's hard to know because they didn't have that option of knowing what it would have been like to first live someplace else
Right.
without having that loss. But it was interesting. They make their feelings known pretty well, and they were happier. It sounds so sad, but they were happier after my mom passed away. She was tired and grouchy, and she was still taking care of them, but not happily. And they were
Right.
aware, and they had lots of rules, and they did not like all the rules, you know.
Yeah.
And it you'll find with siblings that take over that we tend to be a little more willing to take some chances to let them do what they want to do, or at least more of what they want to do. And
Right.
so it really opened up their lives. And I really don't think they grieved her much. They were very, very sad when my dad died, and Pat and Mike were only like 7 and 8 years old. Barty was a teenager, and he was closer to my dad than he was my mom. And my dad was the warm and fuzzy, and we always said my mom was kind of like Patton. She was like, she was the general, and she marshaled those kids. And,
Yeah.
I mean, there were jokes about what it would have been like if my dad was the one and my mom was gone, and we all think, oh my God, I don't know how he would have handled it. We would have run roughshod over him. He was such a warm and fuzzy guy, and he wasn't much of a disciplinarian. And so my mom, maybe from necessity, was the
Yeah.
disciplinarian. And I mean, she was certainly tough, and she needed to be tough, um, especially when after dad died.
Right.
So
So let's talk about from all of those experiences then what SIBS is, what's it stand for, and why did you, because you're the founder of it, so why did you start it and what is its purpose?
yeah, I founded it with a couple of other siblings that I knew that I had, I started to learn about the whole system and what we had to deal with to help our brothers. And that's how I met some siblings for the first time. I was in my 40s, and I finally met my peers, and it was
Mm-hmm.
exciting. And we made fast friendships, because we had that connection. And so there was one sibling organization that we knew of in Ohio, and they would have a conference every year. And so some of the Illinois siblings went out there, and we met with them, and we decided right then and there that we need to have an organization like this. So that's when we founded S.I.B.S, which stands for Supporting Illinois Brothers and Sisters. And we were maybe the second or third organization in the country. And we were connected to the ARC. That's kind of how we met each other. We were connected to the University of Illinois in Chicago, because that's a center of excellence in disability. There's one in every state, and that one, the disability center was headed up by a sister. So we
Okay.
had some great connections that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, and she joined us in our group, and she had lots of connections. So that was really helpful. And after we had been an organization for a little while, we joined with other organizations and we formed a national organization, which is called the Sibling Leadership Network. And now there's something like 37 state chapters. So it's
Wow, that's awesome.
exploded. It's exploded. We're still working on, getting one in every state. We've had national conferences, and so we became a chapter. Our organization was the Illinois chapter of the Sibling Leadership Network, and we've formed with, we have affiliations with the university centers. We have affiliations with other organizations, like the ARC. And I'm a board member on the ARC of Illinois. That's the Illinois chapter of the ARC. So we have some really great collaborations. And that's kind of how we were able to grow it, being connected to other organizations. And that's how we found, we find more siblings, but we still struggle to find siblings before they're in some sort of a crisis situation. So we're also connected to SIBNet. And SIBNet is a international, but mostly US based group of siblings all across the country, in Canada, some other countries. It was founded in Seattle by a man called Don Myers, and he founded the Sibling Support Network, the Sibling Support Project, I mean. And it was nothing really out there when he did this. And he kind of realized that siblings needed support too, not just parents. And so he came up with this idea, and then he came up with programs for younger siblings, and they're called SIB shops, and different organizations sponsor them, and they have groups, they have programs for different ages, for little kids and for teenagers, and for the adults. We have SIBNet. And when I first met and heard about, that other SIBs were out there and they had some sort of a support thing, and it was a long time ago. So Facebook wasn't a thing. And what SIBNet had back then was a Yahoo listserv. I mean, a lot of the younger siblings would be like, "What's that?"
Yeah. Right.
So, I mean, essentially it was like an online mailing list, but you could go and get on it and talk to other people. And that was really where we learned, like, how do you do this? And, we kind of did it backwards, and, we could have done things a lot differently if we had been connected before my mom died. And so that's one of our missions, is to connect siblings with the resources and supports that they need. And, we really do a lot of emphasis on future planning. And, and that's what we talk about a lot. That's how we, like when we go to other organizations, conferences and stuff like that, we try to get a sibling panel into each conference. It's sort of a mission. And we have a convention in Illinois in April. The ARC of Illinois annual convention. It's actually their 75th. And we have 3 siblings things that are going on at that organization. And we have the current director of the Sibling Support Project as one of the keynote speakers, and I was instrumental in making that happen.
That's fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it was funny because back in the day when my mom passed, there were lots of parent organizations. I mean, obviously, this organization that I'm part of is 75 years old. It was developed by parents.
Right.
You know, prep everything out there was kind of developed by parents. And at first, there was a little bit of resistance of the siblings, you know, getting into it, right? And demanding our place at the table. You know, we were a little pushy, and sometimes it wasn't so welcomed. And it took a while for siblings to be on the boards of these organizations, and it's the older sibs like me that were instrumental in those things. And it, you know, people think that's really great, and that's really, you know, so selfless of you. And I'm like, no, you know, it was selfish. We wanted supports. We wanted people to hear us, to, you know, to know that we're important too. And so it was a little bit of a battle to get us heard. And, you know, it's so different for the people that are younger than me. You know, there's a lot out there for them now.
Right.
You know, it's not always so easy to find. And that's one of the things, and it's great because, you know, like, you're involved with parents, and you can introduce to parents, hey, if there's a sibling in, you know, in your child's life, here's something for them.
Right.
And I don't know, as a person who supports people with their IEPs, whether you've seen very many siblings come to an IEP meeting.
None.
Yep.
Not unless they were so little they didn't have a choice.
Right. Yes. And we don't want that. We want people to decide they want to do it.
Right.
But I know siblings that have gone to IEPs. And, you know, that was just not a thing. I'm not even sure they had IEPs when my brothers were in school. They didn't have a lot, and they were really separated, which was sad.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we would take the bus together, and then when we got to our school, then the brothers would get off that bus and onto another bus and go to the separate school.
Okay.
And that was the way it was in the 60s.
Right. And at least for your brothers, they were educated. You know, part of the big push for the law was because so many people with disabilities before the law were not educated at all, or it was kind of like what you're saying, but it was they lived there too. You know, they didn't just go to school and come home. They were sent to institutions to have to live there. And so I do want to bring up, so I had your website up, but I do just want to say what the website address is. It is www.SIBSnetwork.org. And of course, again, that stands for Supporting Illinois Brothers and Sisters. But also you have a Facebook group, and I'm going to pop that into the screen here, and it's numbers. So it's the facebook.com/groups/920-970-2292. And it is a closed group. So you do have to ask to join, and you'll have to answer a couple of questions and let somebody decide, you know, that they can let you in, that you are part of the group, and you're not going to say or do anything that would be bad for the group. And yeah, when we're talking about, you just mentioned this future planning. What kinds of things do you recommend to your siblings as far as that future planning goes?
There are some resources on our website that are about future planning. There's different kinds of things that they can get into. There's a program called The Future Is Now that was developed at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And it's really kind of got step-by-step guidelines into how you do this. I think one of the very most important things that siblings need to know is there are special needs attorneys. And that was one of the reasons, and that wasn't maybe so common around the time my mom passed away, but that you want to have somebody that understands the law. And so then when, if you set up a trust, then you have the right kind of trust that protects your benefits. If you, we also want people to learn about guardianship and alternatives to guardianship. I was a co-guardian of my younger two brothers. And when Marty got his diagnosis, we were able to talk to him and work with him on what do you want. And we never felt he needed a guardian. And we also knew that there can be burdens to guardianship. So we want people to have all of those resources and options that that we didn't have. And we like to inform people about this so that they don't have a big shocking problem, when their parents pass away. I mean, that's really where the motivation came from. To do all this, because it's been a lot of work. And I finally stepped down as an executive board member of S.I.B.S after being one of the founders, and I was the treasurer forever.
Yeah.
And I'm just a board member now. And I'm approaching 70. One of the things that we joke about is that as siblings, we don't ever really retire.
Right.
Because we always have a job.
Yeah.
And the only way we lose that job is a sad way.
Exactly.
So we don't want to lose that job if we can avoid it. But we don't want it to be a hard job. And it can impact your whole life, especially if you don't plan well.
Right.
And then it impacts your own family. It certainly impacted my husband. It impacted my son when mom died and I was gone every weekend.
Right.
Yeah. So those are the things we're trying to avoid.
Yeah. And again, I so appreciate you being so honest in what you're sharing, because, if you are dating someone that has a sibling who has some significant needs and may end up living with you at some point, or like you said, you didn't move very far away from the area, which limited your husband's opportunities. I don't think people really understand how serious that is and how much that can impact your life. And and your husband and your brother-in-law sound like, they are great people, that they have that compassion toward your brothers. And in my opinion, that's what it is. It's compassion, it's being a great person, but at the same time, you can still be a great person and not want to take on those responsibilities.
And we always say we shouldn't have to if we don't want to.
Right. Yep.
And there were some of my siblings that it wouldn't have been a fit,
Yeah.
you know? And I remember resenting them in a way, I kind of had to, come to the realization that we aren't all made to be caregivers,
Right.
and
Yeah.
one of my sibs has a chronic disease, so she did take in my brother for a while, and good for her because she had her own challenges. um
Right.
and there have been times that my husband has been sick or I have been sick, and fortunately for my brothers, there were two sisters that were willing and able,
Yeah.
you know um
Yeah.
but not all siblings have that. And I know a lot of siblings, you know siblings that are friends of mine are like, they're jealous. You have more siblings. It's just
Yeah.
me.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that was something else that was just kind of ruminating is I know some people who it is just one sibling. They don't have the opportunity to have multiple people helping them. And for that, I definitely want to say, it's okay if you don't feel you have the capacity or if you don't want to take care of that sibling. It shouldn't have to feel like it's a responsibility or a burden because I think it might become a resentful situation if you go into it thinking that way. Not that if you go into it willingly and say, "Oh, absolutely, I can do this." You're still probably going to have some days or moments when you resent the situation, not the person. Um, but if you start off resenting the situation, it's not going to be a good situation for anyone, in my opinion. Maybe it can be turned around, but I just feel like there must be more situations that don't turn around than do.
Yeah. And I mean, I know siblings that have said, I can't get married, or I
Mhm.
choose not to get married because I know that this responsibility is coming to me, which I think is heartbreaking. That's not
Yep.
that's not the reason anybody should decide whether or not they want to have a life partner.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but some of them feel that way, and that's a horrible, thing.
Yeah. And a very
Um,
isolating feeling. And so I'm so thankful that I found you all. I think it was last year sometime, and that I was able to have you be the guest. I know we were trying to get some younger sibs on,
yes,
and the timing of things just didn't work out. But maybe I will have them on at another time when our schedules do work out. Nora, I so appreciate again. I know I've said this a couple of times, but your honesty, it's very refreshing. And I'm so appreciative because I have a feeling that there are some siblings who are going to listen to this who, for the first time, are going to feel like they're not a horrible person because they have some of the thoughts that you expressed, that you felt, or that, they're not responsible. It
right.
doesn't have to be on their shoulders to take care of their sibling if their parents pass. And I do need to wrap up because we're approaching that hour.
Hmm.
So again, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing what you shared and for starting the SIBS network here in Illinois and letting us all know that there are national organizations now so that siblings aren't walking through this journey of life by themselves if they are in a situation like you and your sisters and other siblings are that have a sibling that needs a lot of care.
And I thank you for putting the focus there. Um, it makes a big difference to all of us, you know, to have to have these resources shared. It validates us, So we appreciate you, and we very much appreciate what you do.
Oh, well, thank you. It is my joy to be able to bring these stories to everyone. And on that note, in 2 weeks, I'm going to say it again. It'll be the 200th episode. So I have had I will have at that point had 200 opportunities to learn about amazing people and their amazing stories. And I thank every one of my guests that I've had so far. And I look forward to being able to do 200 or more in the upcoming years. So make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss another episode. And you definitely don't want to miss the 200th episode. Everybody have a great week. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.